Hello, my name is Naomi.
And I'm Ruthie.
And today we're going to be talking about grief. So, Ruthie, what is grief?
Well, I'll answer it in two ways. For someone who's never gone through grief, it will feel like a hard moment that someone who's going through it is going through. And if you've gone through grief, it feels like a wave. There's times the wave will be too huge to handle, and there's times it's like it's not present, but it will always be there. What do you think grief is?
That's a really great definition. I think you really captured all of it. And something that we've reflected on a lot in this house is that sometimes as young people, talking about grief can seem really taboo because we think it's something that happens mainly to older people like our grandparents or our parents. But it can happen to anybody. None of us are immune to grief and death, and it's something that we should normalize talking about. So today, Ruthie and I want to talk a little bit about our experiences of grief, maybe give some tips about how you can help someone who's grieving, and also how you can help yourself when that season happens to happen to you. So I'll start by talking a little bit about my experience. So about 2 years ago in 2018, January 7th, 2018, my brother passed away. He was my only sibling, and it was in a tragic car accident. So it was very quick. We didn't see it coming. And he was dead before we arrived at the hospital. And at the time, I'd never dealt with grief. No one that close to me had ever died. And I was, to say it shortly, like a mess, just an absolute mess. I didn't know what to do. It felt like life just didn't really have meaning anymore because you could just die 1 second and it would all be over. And I remember the most intense feeling that I felt was that life just somehow continued, even though my life seemed to have ended. I remember going to the grocery store and looking around, and everyone was just going about their day, buying their bananas and apples and things, and I was a mess. And luckily I had really great friends who were there for me even when I was actively pushing them away. And some things that really helped me during those times were just having people who were checking up on me, even like weeks and months after this had happened. But then also having like a little bit of space to think about what had happened and to reflect and just to breathe. And one thing I think I'm going to keep in mind for the next time that something like this happens is that it's really important to deal with these things when they come rather than dealing with them later. And that's something that I found myself a bit in falling into the trap of because I was so busy at the time. I was a student and I was trying to finish my degree, and sometimes it's easy to push off grief because it's something that's happened. And you can always think, well, I'll think about this later, I'll deal with it later, but right now, like, I just need to finish this degree and, like, do these things. And sometimes you don't have the luxury of dealing with it, but I didn't really deal with it until I came here to Oxford, and I had the time to think and breathe and all of those things. But I do wish that I had sort of thought about it earlier, and that could have helped to lessen the impact that it had on the people around me who had to deal with messy Naomi. How about you, Ruthie?
I don't know what to add after what you've shared, Naomi, but allow me to say this. Naomi has been my friend, yes, for 2 years, and she has taught me what grief is and how to deal with grief. We haven't figured it out yet, but we're in the process. And for me, I will say I have dealt with grief indirectly, at least until sometime in July this year. When I say indirectly, I mean it's probably the closest person I'd lost before July was my grandmother, maybe classmates, and one of the closest people I'd lost was a lady I'd taken care of before I came to Oxford. But still, there's a way society makes us feel, or makes it feel like, okay, that's not your close-knit family, so you should not grieve for so long. So that's how I dealt with grief. I hadn't thought of it as something to dwell on so much. So if Naomi's okay, I can share this. Early this year, during lockdown, we decided to celebrate Nick's birthday. Nick is Naomi's brother's birthday, and we were all set for the day before that. We made a nice ice cream cake, a cake that he really loved. But the next day, Naomi she calls it a mess, but I don't call it a mess. I call it the natural cycle. It just landed on her. And I remember I was in the kitchen just handling everything. I felt the pain she felt, And in these times, it reminds me of when I was younger and maybe my friends lost their family. I used to feel like I wish I'd be in their shoes for just one moment. I know it's a crazy prayer to ask for, but I'd be like, God, take me to a similar position that my friends are in so that I could understand. But anyway, coming back to Nick's birthday, I really felt it. I felt it. I didn't know how to handle it, but I remember a beautiful realization coming to me that grieving never ends. It continues, and it changes though. The way probably she grieved when Nick passed away is different from the way she grieves right now, but it never ends. And as she said, the best realization is acknowledging that it hurts and you need to address and actually let the feelings be, and be present as you're going through each moment. And she taught us as a family how to be there for a friend who's going through such a hard moment. Coming back to the question that Naomi asked me, as I submitted my dissertation this July, the same day I got a text from home that an aunt of mine had passed away. She had been grappling with cancer for 2 years. I remember just today as I was preparing for this, I remember thinking about how on 22nd September, before we left, before I traveled to Oxford, all my family came together and we were singing Great is Thy Faithfulness. And I remember a feeling passing through my mind and asking God, please, I hope that these people will be there when I come back. But I'll be going back and some people won't be there, and she's one of them. And that takes me to the next stage that you're to talk about, like the 5 stages of grief. I'm curious to see how Naomi describes it, because that will lead us to what you're going to talk about next. But how I dealt with it, I numbed myself for a while, and that's denial. The first stage, denial and isolation. I acted like nothing had happened. And being far away from home, that can actually happen. You can just choose to decide she's not dead. That's not true. And there's a really nice book that I like and I'll recommend. It's called On Death and Dying by Kubler-Ross. Kubler-Ross. That's it. So she talks about death, denial, the first stage, and then anger, the second stage. This is where you try to grapple with the questions of why. Why did it have to be this way? I wish it could have been sickness instead of just the sudden death. I wish there was a sign that could have shown us that this is happening. The third one is bargaining, and bargaining almost similar to anger. And then the fourth one is depression. Now here it really sinks in, and the absence really sinks in. And then after that comes acceptance, and with acceptance comes hope. Yes. And this takes us back to just acknowledging that it's a long process and being okay with everything that happens. Okay, we should continue to the next thing. So how was your experience, Naomi? And you mentioned about what helped during the process. And does grief go away?
No, grief definitely does not go away. It's something that stays with you sort of for the rest of your life, but it does change form, and this is something that Ruthie and I have talked about. So the grief that I'm feeling now towards my brother, it comes in a different form than the grief that I felt 2 years ago when he had just died. And over time, as Ruthie had mentioned with the 5 steps, it does form into a form of hope, that you begin to view your life in just in my opinion, a more, just honestly a more beautiful way, because you realize you embrace the entirety of life. You're not just thinking like, okay, I'm going to live forever. I'm not going to think about the fact that one day I might not be here. You're living because you want to leave a good legacy, and you want to honor that, and it just adds a whole nother sort of layer to your life. But something that we wanted to sort of end off on was giving some tips about ways that you can help other people who are going through grief, or maybe even help yourself, especially as young people who are trying to navigate these new feelings and subjects. So there's some practical things, of course, like bringing people food, or even offering to clean their house or do any chores that they can do. Something that I think it can be really simple to ask someone who's going through a grieving process or just a difficult time in general, like if they need something, but sometimes they don't even have the capacity to know what it is that they need. Like they don't realize that they haven't eaten in 4 days, or that, you know, they haven't cleaned the house because their mind is just somewhere else. So just being observant and understanding, or trying to put yourself in their shoes and think, okay, what can I practically do to help this person without burdening them by asking them, and figuring out what, just taking some initiative there and figuring out what they need. Another big thing that I really enjoy is like having someone who can, I guess, ask questions about the person every once in a while. In a way, it's, to me, like keeping their memory alive. So one thing I really appreciated about Ruthie and my housemates is that we celebrated my brother's birthday. And I think for me, I was thinking, like, I don't know if they're even gonna want to celebrate it, and like this is really weird because he's been dead for 2 years, like I should be over it by now, that kind of stuff. But knowing that his memory is still alive really makes you feel less alone in the grieving process. Knowing that they're just not forgotten just because they're not around anymore, and finding ways to celebrate them is really important. So if you can do that for someone, do that. Even if the person died 50 years ago, like big days like birthdays and even the day when they passed can really mean a lot to them, celebrating those together. Do you have any suggestions, Ruthie?
Actually, I'm still in the learning process, and I must thank Naomi because she has been my teacher in this process. One other thing we did together recently, and we learned this from our special friend of ours, shout out to you, Jane, was making care packages. So a care package could be really simple, inexpensive, and just a little bag of goodies telling someone that I feel you. I might not fully understand what you're going through, but I care. Yeah. And they come through handy. And something else Naomi has probably mentioned, talking about it. I think it's really important. We're in a society where we talk about good things, but the hard feelings, we don't want to talk about them. But we should normalize talking about hard feelings also. Yes. And just on this, it reminds me, after my aunt died recently, my mom and I were writing an article together talking about children and grieving, and that led me to talking to so many of my childhood friends who probably lost their parents at quite a young age. And one thing ran across all the conversations I had: they never talked about the absence of their parents. You know, coming from probably black communities and African societies, you don't talk about the dead. They're gone. You'll see them in glory when Christ comes back if you're Christians. And if you're Muslims, it's different. And if you're in other faiths, it's different. And they all mentioned how not talking about it affected them to date. Like one mentioned how it's affected how she deals with other people, like in her relations. And I think part of healing is the talking process. So I'm learning. I'm hoping to be a better listener and also know what to say. Yes.
I think that's a beautiful note to end it on. Thank you guys for joining us. We look forward to talking about more important and real topics. If you have any suggestions, feel free to reach out to us. But we hope that this can be helpful and useful to anyone. We hope you have a great rest of your day.
Yeah. Bye-bye.